Everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Phoenix, where it's 180 bajillion degrees outside, so we're going to do this one from inside. A lot of you have written in, and honestly, I was pretty curious myself about something that's going on in China with the telecommunications firm Huawei. Now, that is a firm that stands accused, or guilty, really, of trying to modify wireless equipment and cellular equipment for the wider world so that the Chinese government can have a cheap and easy insight into everyone's communications. They got discovered by the Australians. The Australians basically alerted everybody else, and now we're dealing with widespread sanctions led by the Americans, but participating by every major country in the world that does the production of cellular equipment. And it's kind of crushed their business model. Now, in the last month, they have released a new phone, which is their first in a while because it took them a while to do anything without the ability to import equipment from anywhere else. And it has a 7-nanometer chip in it. And for those of you who've been watching me for a while, I've said that there's not a lot that the Chinese can do that's better than 90 nanometers. That's what they can do themselves without external help. And 28 nanometers, because of sanctions, is about the best they can hope for. So 7, obviously, potentially a very big deal. So we took a little bit of time, we dug into the details, and the short version is I'm not as worried as I was when this first came out. And it has to do with what the Chinese have access to. There are two types of chip-making styles. The first uses something called deep ultraviolet, and that's what was used for this chip. Now, this is an older technology that has a number of drawbacks. You basically have to customize your equipment and modify your equipment for each individual chip design. So every time you have a new design, you have to kind of overhaul your factory and your lithography system from the ground up. And the way that the Chinese have done this is basically pirating design details from TSMC in Taiwan, and then hiring just a huge number of people to do some technology transfer. They basically, especially when sanctions kicked in, just basically were told they have a bottomless budget to go out and build a sub-10 nanometer chip. And they did, and it cost them 5 times as much as it should have. And the chip that they ended up making wasn't that great because they couldn't do the design. That information, those people, they weren't able to hire away. So it's basically a crypto mining chip made with a little bit smaller etching, which means that for a phone, it's really not a great option. More importantly, probably from the Dutch point of view, the Dutch are the ones who make this equipment, is that this theft started well before the sanctions. Remember, the sanctions have only been in place for 2, maybe 3 years now. This started 5 years ago. So it is the penultimate expression of what the Chinese can do with a bottomless supply of money and absolutely no business ethics and the ability to hire anyone they want, all of which is, under threat in the sanctions regime now. So kudos for being able to get something sub-7, but it's only about as good as your average smartphone from maybe 2017, which is not nothing, but it's certainly not the breakthrough that some people seem to think it is. The second sort of technology is called extreme ultraviolet, and that is what you do to do all the good chips and the leading edge chips now, especially the 3 and the 5 nanometers that most smartphone folks are wanting to put in their machines. This system is much more modular, and you don't have to redesign everything from the ground up. So when it finally did come online, which is just like about 4 years ago, everyone was really excited because all of a sudden the time to target for bringing a design to production could be shrunk. It's still talking months to years, but you don't have to refabricate everything within your facility every time you have a new chip designed. And so far, it seems to be performing to snuff. And it's this sort of equipment that the Chinese can't get at all. In fact, don't have any of at all in the country. So the DUV, they were able to use the stuff that they had and buy stuff that was no longer restricted, or that wasn't restricted yet, combined with a huge amount of subsidies, combined with a lot of poaching, and they were able to cobble together a phone that does use something that is technically sub-10 nanometer, even though it doesn't perform anywhere like that for a phone. The EUV is simply off the market for them, and everyone else is moving forward. So from my point of view, this is really instructive. Think of it like this way. Think of it like I had said that the Chinese couldn't build a television, and I'm thinking of like those OLEDs that you hang on the wall that weigh like 20 pounds, have a slight curve and the deep black and blah, 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 blah. And the Chinese are like, oh, we can totally build a TV. And they came out with like a 48-inch tube TV. It's technically a TV. Technically, I was wrong, but in terms of the technology, this is not something that really takes them forward. If anything, this is a one-off because they can't use the stuff to advance because they don't know how to make the better chips. And the reason that DUV was ultimately abandoned is by the time we got to about 15 nanometers, it was really skirting the edge of what you can do with physics, because the wavelength for the light is wider than what you need to etch on the chip. And they basically had to tweak the laws of physics to get down to 7, and that's the upper threshold. But even doing something a little bit dumber than that, it's not clear that the Chinese have the ability, because they no longer have access to the expertise of the Dutch. So this is really, really illuminating to me for how far the Chinese are willing to go in order to say that they broke the sanctions. But they really didn't. There's nothing about this that is homegrown. There's nothing about this that is replicable. In fact, there's a possibility that may kind of fall into that category of stupid things that they've been doing lately, in that you've got a number of people in the American Congress who are not interested in doing a week of research to figure out the details, who are just like, oh, well, he's breaking sanctions. Well, we'll show them. We'll just put in front of the president a bill that says that all technological transfers and sales to Huawei are now illegal. So not just the top stuff, everything. It's Congress who knows how that's ultimately going to shake out. But the Chinese are finding more and more ways to sacrifice their position on the altar of ego. And it looks like this might be one more. All right, everyone take care. Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from above Spanish Square in New Orleans. And it is the 13th of September. And the big news, that is not a 747. That's kind of fun. The big news is when you see this tomorrow, we will be within hours of a potential auto workers strike, the first one of significance in decades, and potentially a very economically and especially politically consequential one. Let's start with the economics. Manufacturing is not one of the huge sectors in the United States. We're much more of a services country, but manufacturing of automobiles is the single largest subcomponent. So the auto workers are threatening to strike if they don't get their way, which could take the largest section of manufacturing offline, which would have massive economic ramifications. If they were to strike for as little as 3 weeks, it would be more than enough to throw the United States into a recession from the quarter. And considering that this quarter, we're probably going to see economic growth north of 5%, which is almost unheard of for an advanced country, the economic impact obviously would be huge. The impact on specific types of automotive could be particularly bad. A lot of American automakers are attempting to launch new EV lines, and this was supposed to be the year that all of it hit the market, and this would just stop it in its tracks. So I can't tell you whether the strike is going to happen. They're asking for more than a 1/3 increase in pay, but the damage they could do to the economy would be immense. So kind of even odds there. But in terms of, wow, there's some sort of party going over there, because of course it's New Orleans, and it doesn't matter that it's only Wednesday. Anyway, let's talk politics now. For the last several decades, unions have been part of the Democratic coalition, and they've kind of been the economic core of that coalition, the people within the coalition who can do math, if that's an easier way to think of it. However, they feel fairly put upon. Under Clinton, the Democrats shifted to the right on economic issues, especially on issues such as globalization, which led to a steady decline in union membership. And as NAFTA took hold, a lot of union jobs vanished into Mexico. And as manufacturing then expanded in value-added terms in the United States, most of the new jobs in manufacturing and auto went to places that were not union states, most notably Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and especially Texas. So when you're looking at what's been happening with trade and with the reshoring of trade, unions really haven't benefited from that at all. And that's part of the reason why unions are no longer really functionally part of the Democratic coalition. Donald Trump was very effective at bringing them over to his side during his term. Joe Biden has been partially successful in bringing them back, but it's best to think of them as swing voters right now. And this is something we're just going to have to get used to, the fact that the unions are becoming more of a linchpin in the American political process. And not just because they're in the wind right now, but it's a lot of votes. In the world we're evolving into, in the country the United States is evolving into, there are not enough workers. The boomers are the largest generation we've ever had. The Xers that are replacing them at the top of the pyramid of worker skills have a lower worker participation rate. And the new generation coming in are the Zoomers, and they're the smallest generation we've ever had. So we're looking at a significant reduction in the availability of labor writ large in the system. And in that sort of environment,
you would expect organized labor, or just labor in general, to have more and more pricing power and more political power. And that's before you consider that the problems in East Asia and the problems in Western Europe suggest that if the Americans still want stuff, autos or otherwise, we're going to have to double the size of the industrial plant. That's going to take a lot of workers. That's going to take a lot of blue-collar workers, exactly the sort of workers that are more likely to unionize than not. So what we're going through today, what we're likely to be going through the next few weeks as these negotiations drag on, don't think of it as an aberration. This is now part and parcel of the American economic and political experience. And whichever party the unions ultimately fall in are going to have a significant increase in their overall hold on American life. The end.